Of all the concepts in Carl Jung's vast and intricate psychology, perhaps none is more central, or more easily misunderstood, than what he called the self. In everyday language, the self is simply you, your sense of personal identity, your stream of conscious experience, your awareness of being a particular person in a particular body with a particular history. Jung had a word for that version of the self too, the ego. But the self with a capital S was something else entirely, something far larger, far less personal, and in many ways far more important. For Jung, the ego is not the center of the psyche. It is the center of consciousness, which is a much smaller thing. Think of the total psyche as an enormous sphere. The ego is a smaller sphere near the surface, illuminated by the light of awareness. Everything outside that smaller sphere, everything in the vast depths of the personal and collective unconscious, is part of the psyche too, but inaccessible to ordinary conscious awareness. The self, in Jung's model, is the center of the entire sphere. Not the center of consciousness, but the center of the whole. The organizing principle of the total personality. Jung was careful to distinguish between the self as a concept and the self as a living psychological reality. The self is not a philosophical abstraction. It makes itself felt. It announces its presence in specific, recognizable ways, most commonly through dreams, and through what Jung called numinous experiences, encounters with something so charged with meaning, so saturated with significance, that the ordinary categories of ordinary experience seem inadequate to contain it. Religious experience, the encounter with great art, certain moments in nature, and certain peak moments in psychotherapy all carry this quality. Jung saw them as manifestations of the self breaking through the surface of conscious life. In dreams, the self tends to appear as figures or symbols of wholeness and authority. A wise elder whose guidance carries uncanny precision. A child radiating extraordinary light and significance. A king or queen, a divine figure, a luminous animal. Most characteristically, the self appears as circular or symmetrical forms, mandalas, radiant wheels, perfectly ordered geometrical figures, which Jung observed spontaneously arising in the drawings and dreams of patients at moments of psychological integration. He saw the mandala as the preeminent symbol of the self, the circle with a center, the pattern of organized wholeness. The relationship between ego and self is one of the central dynamics in Jungian psychology. Healthy psychological development requires that the ego maintain its own integrity and function without either dominating the unconscious or being swallowed by it. Jung described two failure modes. The first is ego inflation, the condition in which the ego identifies with the self, mistaking its own perspective for the totality of reality. The inflated ego believes itself to be the measure of all things, omniscient, omnipotent, beyond critique. The result is a kind of psychological grandiosity that, in extreme cases, resembles psychosis, and in milder forms produces the self-righteous certainty and impenetrable arrogance that is both common and costly in human life. The second failure mode is ego dissolution, the collapse of the ego's boundaries in the face of unconscious material it cannot metabolize. Rather than integrating the energy of the unconscious, the person is overwhelmed by it. This can occur in psychological breakdown, in certain drug-induced states, and sometimes in badly conducted spiritual practice that dismantles the ego before any stable integration is possible. The healthy alternative is what Jung called the ego-self axis, a living, dynamic relationship between the conscious center and the deeper organizing principle of the whole psyche. In this relationship, the ego is neither inflated nor dissolved. It maintains its own center while remaining permeable and receptive to what arises from the depths. It acts as an instrument of the self's broader purposes rather than as an autonomous captain who imagines itself the master of a vessel it cannot fully see. This is why the self has traditionally been associated with the divine in many religious and philosophical traditions, and why Jung argued that religious experience, properly understood, is not a projection onto an external deity but a genuine encounter with the deeper organizing principle of the psyche itself. The God images of humanity's great religions are, in Jungian terms, projections of the self, attempts to represent, in personified and culturally specific form, the overwhelming authority, depth, and wholeness of the psychic totality. Subscribe to Psychology Theories Explained to explore more of the ideas that shape the modern mind.